Welcome to Doctors Unbound, your show devoted to doctors who are, well, unbound by physician stereotypes. Get a behind-the-scenes look at doctors that are breaking the mold and breaking into the worlds of technology, writing, investing, politics, just to name a few. This is Doctors Unbound, where you'll hear from experts with the insights to help you go to the next level. Let's get this show started. Here is your host, Dr. Dave Draginas.
You're listening to episode 14 of the Doctors Unbound podcast. I've got a big little confession to make to you today. I am unique just like everybody else, and with that uniqueness comes just a little bit of quirkiness. And in the intro to today's episode, you're going to get a little bit of that quirkiness coming through. So my quirky question for you today is, what is your favorite happy song? Do you have a favorite song with the word happy or about happiness in it? Is it something a little bit modern, like maybe Pharrell's Clap Along If You Feel Like a Room Without a Roof? Or maybe something from some classic television, like Goodbye Gray Skies, Hello Blue, There's Nothing Can Hold Me When I Hold You? Or maybe it's something happy but with a little bit more of a romantic twist. Something like Me and You and Me. No matter how they tossed the dice, it had to be. Or is it just simply that good old classic song? In every life, we have some trouble, but when you worry, you make it double. So don't worry. Be happy. Be happy. I would really love it if you just emailed me and just let me know what your favorite happy song is. So you're probably thinking right now, number one, Dr. Dave is kind of weird. And maybe number two, why does he have happy on his mind so much? Well, first off, it's because I just love this time of year. Thanksgiving was great. And my little ones are so excited this time of year. They're excited about Thanksgiving, and now they're just, beaming with the anticipation of Christmas. And it's just a magical time of year, especially if you have little children. But I've also got happy on my brain because today's episode is of me being interviewed on the Happy Doc podcast. Thank you to Dr. Taylor Brana for having me on their awesome podcast. Be sure to check out the Happy Doc, an awesome site and show that is promoting healthy, meaningful, and yes, happy physicians and their careers. And now, without further ado, the interview.
Let's go. Hello, everyone. This is another episode of the Happy Doc. I'm super excited, pumped to have our next guest. That's Dr. Dave Draginas. He's an anesthesiologist. He practices in Texas. Previously was in the Navy, and he was a physician in the Navy. So we're going to dig into a lot of really great conversation. The other thing I want to mention is, as an anesthesiologist, he started a website called anesthesiamyths.com, which obviously, as the name suggests, would break down some of the myths in anesthesia. And he also started the podcast Doctors Unbound. And we're going to get into all of that. So I'm really excited to have Dr. Dave with us today. Dr. Dave, can you say hi?
Hi, Taylor. Thank you so much for having me on. I am excited to be on the podcast.
Awesome. It's great to have you. And just to start us off, I always love this question of, what got you excited to go into medicine?
Yeah, so probably like a lot of the physicians out there, doing well in science, thinking about where would I make the biggest impact. I was going through college. I was a biomedical engineering major working in lab. But then I started thinking to myself, when it's all said and done, when I'm through with my career, where do I want my legacy to be, and where do I think that I will have, the greatest impact on society? And I think we're all pretty idealistic at that age. But for me, the answer was medicine. And I did have a mentor. I was working in a molecular biology lab doing research, liking the research, but realizing that a PhD was probably not likely in my career path. And there was a physician doing research in the lab. He was a neurologist. And he took me under his wing, and I started working with him more, and he started telling me about what it's like to be a physician. And I remember one time he said to me, David, there's a specialty in medicine for every kind of person. And, he was the one that really got me thinking about going into medical school, and then started studying for the MCATs, and kind of the rest is history.
That's awesome. So you had this impactful guide in that molecular biology lab that you were talking about. That's great. And so you went into this journey of starting medical school. I like to ask, there's a lot of expectations about what being a doctor is. And so for some of my pre-med listeners, what were your expectations going into this journey versus what the reality was?
Well, I think for most of us, it's really hard to know exactly what it's like when you're actually a physician. Now, I did some things like probably a lot of pre-meds do. I shadowed in a hospital. I did some volunteer work, in the NICU unit, cuddling babies, stuff like that. So I tried to expose myself as much as I could to the hospital and to the physicians. But until you spend some days with a physician, in and out, it's really hard to know. And even then, it's really difficult to know, what it might be like. So it's difficult to have those, to know exactly what you're getting into. But I think for me, I knew that I wanted to go into a field where, I would have a direct impact on people. So that clinical aspect of it was really important. And like I said, having a strong science background, to me, it seemed like the perfect melding of the two.
Sure. And, something that's standing out already is you definitely like to have impact. And so I think that's going to hold true as we get into this discussion about the websites you're building and the podcast you're going into. So you went into anesthesia. I've had many doctors in many fields. I actually have not spoken to an anesthesiologist yet. So what was it about that field that really sparked you and got you excited, aside from the other fields?
Sure. So I went through my third year of medical school where we get into all the sort of required core rotations, and I enjoyed certain aspects of every rotation, but I couldn't see myself doing it as a career. So I was getting a little bit worried because I was kind of going through and checking them off, and it was check off no, another no. And I had strategically left a free block at the end of my third year. And I think this depends from school to school, but the way my school was set up, I had a 6-week block that was available at the end of my third year. And I had a friend who was a year ahead of me in medical school, and he had now declared. And so I started talking to him, and he was going into anesthesia. And I said, well, what do you like about it? He's like, well, you've got to know about kids and old people and all these different medical comorbidities, and then there's procedures on top of it. We have to do lines. We have to intubate patients. You're doing a lot of doing, but you're not in surgery. So those things, I thought, well, gosh, I like those things too. And so with that in mind, I scheduled that free block to be an anesthesia rotation, and I just threw myself at it, kind of full immersion. I said, well, I'm either going to like this or I'll figure out that, that I don't. And so luckily for me, I just ended up really, really liking it. And then that set the career path for the rest of the fourth year.
That's awesome. And you reminded me. Another anesthesiologist told me this before, but he said the cool thing about anesthesia is like, as opposed to other surgery specialties, for example, you will always have a really unique set of cases that might be completely different. So, like he was explaining, like you might have like that abdominal case, or you could have a plastics case, or what have you. So would you say that, you get a wide variety in the work that you do?
Absolutely. You might do this, like you said, you might do the same kind of case. It might be a lap chole, a gallbladder, 1, 2, 3, but that patient is going to be different. That patient is going to have a different set of comorbidities, and that impacts your anesthetic and how, and how you take care of them. So yeah, I mean, every day is going to be a little bit different. Now, just anecdotally, just to cover something that I just thought of, I've noticed that biomedical engineers seem to have an affinity for anesthesia. Now, this is just my own personal thing. I was a biomedical engineering undergrad, and I've noticed that kind of anecdotally as I've gone through my career. So I don't know if it's something about the machine or something like that, the tech aspect of it, but I have noticed that as well.
That's interesting. I wonder why that is. So moving forward a little bit, so you have gone through this field. How long have you practiced anesthesia for?
About 10 years now that I've been out of residency.
Wow, 10 years. That's amazing. And so you've been doing this for 10 years, and you went along and you started this website, anesthesiamyths.com. And I definitely want to touch on that, within this conversation. So what sparked you to go out and develop this website?
Yeah. So what I noticed is I had a certain subset of patients, not a large percentage, but a very significant subset of patients that would come in for elective surgery, and they would come in just freaked out about anesthesia. And I would come in and talk to them and go through and explain everything to them. And usually by doing that, we were able to bring their fears way down. But then I would ask them, I said, well, how long have you been worried about this? And sometimes it was days to weeks, and I would say, well, what'd you do about it? Well, I Googled it, And so I started Googling it, and I noticed just the amount of bad or misinformation that was out there. And so I thought, how can I reach these patients earlier when they're out there on their computer Googling this information? How can I get to them and provide a resource for them that is informational, simple to understand language that would really help them? Because anesthesia is one of those fields that it's very difficult to write about it if you're not in the field. So that's where it started from. And we've been able to put out a lot of good content for people, a lot of articles that explain anesthesia topics. We're kind of revamping it right now, so we're introducing now some video. So we're trying to get people from all different ways of consuming media. So now we're providing these short videos that explain to people different topics about anesthesia.
And what I love about that, and we actually touched on this in a previous interview, is once you have that information out there, like anyone can access it at any time, right?
Absolutely.
And once people have the awareness of the resource, like any anesthesiologist or any surgeon could kind of go online and show this patient, especially with outpatient procedures that are, they're about to come in, they can come in and see this page, and maybe 2 weeks prior, just take a look at the video and get a sense like, okay, it's not as bad as I thought, or okay, my questions are answered. I really love that. Just you're diminishing the anxiety of the situation.
Right, and for the most part, it's evergreen content. Now, some articles may need to get updated here and there, but for the most part, a lot of it is evergreen. And like you said, it's out there. People can access it. I mean, we've had people accessing it from all over the world. So talking about impactful, that's really cool too.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's, and we can talk about this with podcasting or website creation, that's a thing that you put out into the world and people can use it. It's a really great feeling. So I love that you started that. And I'm going to definitely put that in the show notes for anyone who's interested. I think just in general, it's great to have an awareness of these tools, and then obviously you can plug in and use them once you have that awareness. So everyone listening, I mean, that's an amazing tool. So I love that. So now let's move forward a little bit. So you've been a practicing anesthesiologist, and I know we spoke a little bit before about this, but you started a podcast, and before you talk about a little bit, I want to just talk about, what we've discussed and what you said on your first episode, which is you want to learn from experts in their fields. You want to promote a positive image for the physician community. You want to learn from physician experts to hack the learning curve in different aspects of being a doctor or being a leader in the work that they do. You want to have networking possibilities with innovative physicians. You want to have a creative outlet outside of clinical medicine doing the podcast, and you want to leave a legacy for your children. And I do want us to touch about, you having a family, of course. So what was the impetus? What got you so excited to go out and do this podcast?
Yeah, first of all, it's been something that I've been thinking about for years, probably like 2 or 3 years. And, I don't know how long it took you to get started with your podcast, but it just took a long time. It was kind of something that I had thought about, I had gotten excited about. And then it kind of, was there on the back burner because, little kids and working full time and all those things, but it kept coming back. I think because podcasting, number one, I think is a fantastic medium. I think more doctors should be podcasting. I think it's a fantastic medium to connect. And then, you kind of read the laundry list there. For all of those reasons, I thought, wow, this would be an amazing podcast to do. Doctors are role models out there. Sometimes, we feel like we're getting burned out. We feel like, the prestige of medicine has gone down. But every day I work with so many awesome physicians, and the ones that are, they're taking care of patients in the hospital, and also all the things that they do on the side. And I said, I want to highlight some of this stuff and really bring it out to the physician community and even beyond that.
Sure. And so, we can talk about this for a while, I'm sure, but just briefly, what do you think is the impact of developing through yourself some creative outlet like podcasting?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I read an article just the other day, and it talked about if you want to avoid a midlife crisis, like pick up another hobby. So I think it's important for physicians, especially somebody, at the beginning of career, but certainly when you're mid-career, say like I am, you've been about a decade in. I think finding another creative outlet, finding something that is going to occupy your time, that you're going to learn something new, a new skill, I think that's hugely important. And for me, being able to mix that with medicine in a way is like fantastic.
Yeah, it's as I was trying to explain it to someone else in medicine, it's like the gift that keeps on giving, because you have your medical practice, but then you're connecting with other doctors, and that conversation you had feeds into your daily work as well. So it's a pretty cool feeling. And actually, I interviewed Kevin MD, and he actually said he thinks that his trick, or what every doctor should do, is have something besides medicine that can really occupy their time, because if it's all just one subject, you'll get really burnt out. And touching on that, do you feel like this is a work, your creative outlet? Is it something that energizes you?
Yeah, it takes work, right? You can't get around that, but it's meaningful work and it's fun work, So for me, I enjoy it. I enjoy it tremendously. I love every time, I have a guest come on, there's the initial jitters of preparing and, getting ready for the interview. But then after the interview is done, I'm just like, wow, like this person is awesome. I just learned so much. So I'm learning a ton. And then to be able to share that through this medium with everybody else, like, I'm just glad I'm living, during this time. This would not have been possible even maybe 15 years ago.
100%. I think there's a lot of negative aspects to digital media, we could say, in that it can be very distracting.
Sure.
But then on the other side, the connectivity possibilities are absolutely amazing. And you touched on, the learning aspects of all of this. So I would love for you to touch on maybe, what are some cool tips or ideas or concepts that you weren't even aware of until you started this podcast?
Some tips or like in what context? Can you give me
No,
just a little bit more?
in terms of the interviews, like, so for example, I saw that you had an episode about freeing your mind or, burning out. What are some of the ideas that maybe you learned just from your guests on the podcast so far?
Sure. So, the mindset one was huge. So I forget who recommended that to me, but basically the idea is having a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And I hadn't even realized until I read this book that I had a lot of elements of the fixed mindset within myself. And so once I was aware of that, then that was the first step to start changing some of these things that are limiting us, right? And for me, as a parent, this was huge because my kids are still pretty young. And so I started with them, and the way I talk to them, I'm talking to them in a growth mindset. So I'll give you a quick example. Caitlin, my 4.5-year-old, she was practicing her letters, and I noticed that she kept doing the ones that she knew. And I was like, hey, Caitlin, why don't you start practicing these other ones? And she's like, nah, I don't want to. And so I started telling her, I said, look, it's okay to make mistakes. I'm like, what's important is that you're learning and growing. And I started telling her, I said, when you started off, you couldn't do any letters, but guess what? You kept trying and you kept improving. And so, now, a few days later, she would come back to me and she would start echoing, she's like, it's okay if I make a mistake, Dad, because I'm learning. And I was just like, it's got to continue to reinforce, but as a parent, that was just like one of those moments, where you're like, okay, this is awesome.
No, that's great. And the cool thing is, right, you're learning these tips or ideas, and then you embed it in, good thought process and mindset into your children so early. That's awesome. So, like, with fixed mindset versus growth mindset, my assumption, defining it wise, is fixed mindset is you're maintaining your level, you're living your life, so to speak. But then the growth mindset is how do you maybe learn or grow each day? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. And with the fixed mindset, the idea is that people have a fixed innate, say, talent, if you will. So the idea would be that, okay, you tell your kid, you're so smart, right? So the kid grows up thinking, oh yeah, I'm smart. Right. So when they encounter something that's really difficult and they can't get it right away, now all of a sudden it's challenging their idea that they're so smart. So now they think, well, maybe this is too hard for me. Maybe I'm not so smart. And then they give up. Versus a kid with a growth mindset where you're not complimenting them on their ability, you're complimenting them on their effort, on their creativity. Now that kid, they get a hard problem, and it's not like, oh, that's too hard for me when I don't figure it out initially. It's like, okay, this is a challenge. This is going to help me learn. This is going to help me grow. Now that kid or person is more likely to stick to it and try and solve that problem a lot more and get better results. So that's kind of the idea. And then it can apply to sports. It can apply to learning. Heck, it could even apply to art. Like for me, that was a big one in the book because I can't draw worth anything. And to me, that's like, oh, that's just me. I can't draw. Well, they showed examples in this book of taking people who couldn't draw worth a lick and getting them to actually draw really well. So we have these abilities to learn, but we limit ourselves with our beliefs.
Yeah, that's awesome, and totally 100% agree. And touching on beliefs, I mean, if you don't believe you can do something, you're already losing.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, and I'm sure we could touch on this with a creative project. Like, if we didn't believe that we could start a podcast, then we're already losing, right? Because you're telling your mind, if your mind almost leads the process, and then you get new ideas, and then you have to take action on those ideas. But if you don't believe it, you're already stuck. So 100% agree. And I think we're almost touching on a little bit of, in terms of what you mentioned with, oh, I'm so smart, is, the humility, like being humble in that moment, realizing, it's okay to make mistakes,
Right.
and that you're going to push forward and grow. I really love this concept. And for anyone listening, think about how might you apply a growth model versus just kind of staying where you're at. I love that's a great concept. So, going through, you developed this website, you've developed Doctors Unbound, and I definitely want people to check that out, and we will refer to it. I would like for us to touch on maybe a difficult time or a struggle that may have impacted you on your journey in medicine.
Sure. So, a tough time for me was when somebody close to me had a medical issue, and this takes us back to when I was a first year medical student, and I came home one weekend because medical school was not too far away from where my parents lived, and I came home and my dad was in a hypertensive crisis, and here I am, a first-year medical student, going through imposter syndrome and all of that, feeling very inadequate, and here's my family kind of looking at me as, what do we do? So I remember very vividly that drive with my father to the emergency room, and him looking at me, and it was the first time in my life, I think, where I actually saw him let his guard down and, kind of like confiding in me that, that he was worried. Up until then, he was the father, he was the strong dad, everything was always going to be okay. That was the first time where he really let his guard down. And I was like, that was really impactful for me because I knew that I now had to be strong for him. He had been strong for me up until that point. Now I had to be strong for him and guide him through this. And he got through it, no bad outcome. Need to get on some blood pressure meds and deal with all that kind of stuff. But he got through it. But, for me, I'll never forget that night.
Wow. No, that's very impactful. And, you're talking about imposter syndrome a little bit, but I feel like, and it definitely happened to me when I entered medical school. All my friends, like my old friends, interacted with me differently. My family members acted, differently. Even 1 week into it, they start asking me medical questions that how would I know what this medication does or what this does? And so for you were saying you're a first year medical student?
Yeah. I mean, I think we all go through this. I mean, I'd get out of church and we'd have little old ladies come and start telling me about their headaches and their abdominal pain. And they're like, I can't wait for you to get out. And I'm like, I don't even know what specialty I'm going into yet. So I think we all go through that.
Yeah, it's kind of just like the weirdest phenomena. And you're like, look, like, and I know, and it was kind of weird too, because I think I got a little bit of like arrogance or something after second year. I was like, oh, I'm so cool, I know everything in medicine, I just took step one. And people would ask me questions, and then I went into third year and I'd maybe answer them even, which, guys, you don't do that, please. And then I go to third year, and then all of a sudden I go into actual clinical medicine. I'm like, look, I know nothing. And then fourth year you go in, you feel a little bit more confident, know, and then you go in, now I'm an intern. So, and then, as my first year, I'm like, oh, I know nothing again. So I feel like, you're always like bobbing and weaving a little bit.
Yeah. And I think that's a kind of maybe not a well-known, but it's a well-described cycle. I remember being a first-year resident and our program director describing that cycle. They're like, yeah, your first year, you're very scared. And like by the end of your first year, you think, you've seen enough. So you think you got it, but you haven't seen enough of the outliers, of the exceptions. And then by the end of your residency, now you kind of know what you don't know.
Sure.
So yeah, what you describe is spot on. It happens in every field, I think.
Yeah, and the conceptual version of this is it's confidence versus competence, and it's like so if you imagine, like, the visual imagery for this is, if you imagine like a staircase, like each step is a new level of competence, and then as you're going up on that step, as you get comfortable with that level of competence, you gain confidence. But then your level of confidence can only, go so high until you're challenged by something new, and then you have to challenge your competence again.
Yep.
So Each level is, or each stage is a new level of competence, and then as you get comfortable, you get a new level of confidence. So it's an interesting thing. And actually, another doctor told me this. I don't know how true this is, maybe a random statistic, but I think they said that, your maximum level of competence in medicine is like somewhere between I think it was like 10 to 15 years after residency. It's where you're still young enough to be eager, but you're not old enough to feel burnt, I don't know, exhausted maybe or something. So it seems like Dr. Dave, you're at your max here.
Yeah. That's okay. That's all right, because I'm in the growth mindset, and I'm going to keep plugging ahead.
No, I'm just messing with you. No. But yeah, it was an interesting statistic. So great. So I mean, you had this very intense story, obviously impactful, and I think anyone who's gone in medicine might be able to touch on a time in their lives where you were in medical school, you had clinical rotations, you never thought about this with your family. And it definitely brings it home for sure. That's tough. So how's it feel, in terms of your practice? You had this hypertensive crisis or urgency situation with your own family member. Do you feel like that's impacted your practice now?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, I'm an anesthesiologist, so I deal with blood pressure all day, every day now.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So who knows? Maybe there was a seed there, where, I thought to myself, okay, I deal with these things in the short term. I'm the one who's actually physically giving the medicine. I watch for the change, and adjust accordingly. So maybe that impacted my desire to go into this acute kind of care type of setting that is the operating room.
Yeah, I just think, I don't know. I think it's funny that that's something that happens and now you're like an expert at it. Yeah, that's interesting. So to move on a little bit, I would love to ask you, who was an inspiring mentor on your medical career, or who inspires you?
So when it comes to inspiration, there's really two components of it, and it's, some of it is going to go back to my family, and I'll explain that, and then we'll talk about on the professional side. So when it comes to the personal side, it's my parents, and my background is that I'm a Romanian American. My parents fled communist Romania to come to the U.S., and my dad did that not knowing the language, $15 in his pocket. And had to wait 2 years before my mom and 2 older sisters could join him. Wow. So to me, I'm just so grateful for the opportunity, to be in this country and to benefit from this country. The sacrifices that they made, and there's a lot of stories like that, but the sacrifices that they made and a lot of people in that generation made are just amazing. Sometimes I think to myself, would I have been able to do that? Would I have had the courage to do that? And I don't know the answer to that. But I'm just eternally grateful for them for doing that. And then even though they didn't have a lot of formal education themselves, I was the first in my family to go to college, they always appreciated education, and they always encouraged us and always did everything they could to have us do well in school and get a good education. So on a personal level, it's my parents.
Wow. And I definitely resonate with that personally. I'm a firstborn American. My family is also, and interesting enough, my dad's side's Romanian.
Oh, really?
Wow. Yeah, so I think, and that's actually not very common. So, yeah, I think that's interesting. So, yeah, no, I think a lot of people these days might take the opportunities we have here for granted, but there's so much opportunity. Mm-hmm. There really is. So it's quite amazing. So you're saying on the personal level, and what was the other part of that?
So on the professional level, really, I have to say that almost every guest that I meet on my podcast is super inspirational. I'll give you 2 examples. One of the first persons that I interviewed was Dr. Christine Scruggs. She's an internist. She wrote a medical thriller, and she did it all while having 2 small kids. And so having 3 kids of our own, but, my wife does, the vast majority of the work there. I help out, but she's awesome. So knowing what it means to have small children, to me, the fact that she was able to do that is just amazing. So I've gotten inspiration from her. I interviewed an anonymous physician on fire, who created a blog about personal finance for physicians, and he started it in January of 2016. Now in his second year, he's already had over 1 million downloads. And I'm just inspired by him, how he's been able to grow his site and impact physicians with, their personal finances. So, I could go on. I mean, everybody, I could pick something from. So for me, that has been really meaningful with this project. Like, it's almost on a weekly now that I meet somebody and I'm just like, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. And I think, the cool thing, and we kind of touched on this before, prior to the interview, but when you have such amazing guests and you have these people, I guess the concept is you don't know what you don't know, right?
Right.
Like there's some aspects of, the game or money making or, inspiration, skill set and business and all those things that you might never pick up. And then you have someone who's already, a step or two steps ahead of you, and you provide knowledge that you might not even realize would be there. Like with the Physicians on Fire, I'm sure he gave maybe some financial advice that you had probably no conceptual idea of prior. And that's amazing. Also, he's also an anesthesiologist, correct?
He is.
Yeah, so I'm sure you guys had a great conversation.
Well, I met him at FinCon. FinCon was in Dallas. He's still anonymous, but got to meet him, got to meet White Coat Investor, got to meet quite a few physician bloggers. So it was pretty awesome.
All right, what's his hair color? That's Are you allowed to tell me that?
I'm sure he will. I'm sure the cat's going to be out of the bag soon. So I'll let him handle that.
No, is he tall or short? I'm just kidding. Okay, we won't do this. All right, no, that's awesome. That's great. So, looking back at your medical career, now you're 10 years into the game. We do have plenty of students listening, plenty of residents listening in. What is one tip or something that you wish you would have heard earlier on the road?
Well, I mean, I don't know if this is necessarily specific for medicine, but like for me, actually podcasting has been huge. And I know there are more medical related podcasts that have come out. But for me, it's such a productive way to deal with time that, I've got to do right. So I have about a 30 to 40 minute drive to and from work, just the nature of my work setup. And now I get to fill it up with awesome things that I can learn about, pretty much whatever it is that I want to learn about. So for me, that has been a huge resource. Instead of listening to commercials and music, like I'm listening to podcasts, and it's been awesome.
Yeah. Someone put it this way. What was it? Like a curriculum in your car?
Yeah.
Like it's pretty amazing. I mean, I just think of how much. Like if you listen to the radio, you listen to a cool song, that's great, get your energy up. But when you're also listening to an impactful book or a really cool guest, like such as yourself, it definitely changes you a little bit, I think.
It does. It makes you grow. It challenges your thinking. It inspires you to do more. I mean, I've gotten all of that from podcasts.
That's awesome. I love it. So with your podcasting on this topic, what is your dream or vision? Where do you see this going in a year, 2 years, 3 years?
Yeah, so I want to increase my reach to as many physicians as I can. So, you read off that list of things that are meaningful for me with the podcast. So I want to be able to reach more doctors so that I can tell these stories of these physicians and share them with as many people as I can. And not just physicians, also the public at large, because it's important. I think it's important to have these physicians that are role models that are already doing these amazing things, get credit for them. And we can all learn from them along the way. Why nothing against actors, but, why do we have so much to learn from an actor versus a physician, right? I think we have just as much, if not more, to learn from a physician.
Yeah, definitely. And there's, something I didn't appreciate until recently, but it's so true, is we get, as doctors in general, every single day we encounter the human condition at like all varieties, all ages, unless you're, in specific fields, right?
Right.
But different ages, different disease states. You're interacting with healthier people, nursing staff, and then on the flip side, you handle the sickest of the sick. And I mean, what greater wisdom could you get than from seeing the variety of human condition every day? It really puts things into perspective. And I don't think there's a field quite like it where you're meeting people at some of their most vulnerable states. So with that being said, to connect back to what you're saying, it's there's a lot that doctors can give to the public. It's amazing.
Absolutely. And you hit it on the head. We deal with people in their most stressful times, and there's a privilege that goes along with that. And then we also get to take part in some of the most amazing times too, the birth of a child, things like that. So, we see the gamut. I think, the stress aspect of it obviously takes its toll on us, but then on a flip side of that coin, it's also what gives it a lot of meaning too, right? Being able to impact people at that level. So it's pretty awesome, and I want more people to know about it.
Sure, I love it. So, as this is the Happy Doc, I would love to ask you, what makes you a happy doctor?
Sure. So for me, it starts with my faith. That is very important to ground me and to bring meaning to my life, and to know that there's a higher purpose and a higher calling. And then it goes to my family. I'm very blessed. I have an amazing wife, amazing partner, and 3 awesome kids. So it goes to my family. And then after that, being a physician and being able to have a meaningful career where I can impact so many people that, impacts people every day, so that's kind of how it lines up for me. And then, just gratitude for living in the time that we are now, where the technology is such where you and I can chat over an internet connection and talk about these things, and then bring this to, an audience out there. Fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in Pennsylvania, you're in Texas. This is being recorded. Someone in China might be listening to this at some point, except Trump might be pissed about it. But anyways, that's the point. But no, it's really incredible. It's an incredible age. And what is one tip, and I can also help, in this construction, but what's one tip that you'd like to leave to the listeners today?
So if I can impress upon you one thing, is to take action. Even if it's a small step, get that small win and take action towards something. Now, the audience is going to be vast out there. You might have different ideas, different things that you might want to do. What I would like to encourage physicians to do is to think about creating an impact on a greater scale. So whether that is a podcast, whether that's a blog, whether that's a vlog, do something creative that has a chance to have an impact at a great scale. So take some small step towards that. And if I can, what I would like to do is I'm going to create a little resource. I'm going to call it 9 Reasons Why Doctors Should Podcast. And if people like, we'll put it on Doctors Unbound /WHY podcast, Y podcast. So we'll create a resource there. And so if I can encourage you, 9 reasons why doctors should podcast. And of course you could substitute in there blogging, vlogging, whatever it is.
I love it. That's awesome. And we definitely want to refer to your resource. So how do people reach you?
So people can reach me through my site, doctorsunbound.com, or my email is doctorsunbound doctorsunbound@gmail.com. So you can, if you want to send me a message there, I'm also on Twitter and Facebook. You can either search by my name or by the Doctors Unbound podcast. So yeah, I would, if anybody out there has some specific questions for me, wants to reach out, wants to connect, I would love to connect with you. I would love to help you with whatever I can, especially if it has to do with podcasting or media.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. David Draginas, with your Doctors Unbound podcast, with all the work that you're doing that is very impactful. It's absolutely a pleasure to have you today, and thank you so much for your time.
Taylor, thank you. I really enjoyed our talk today.
All right, take care.
Thank you for listening to Doctors Unbound podcast. Remember to head over to doctorsunbound.com to access all the show notes and resources discussed in this episode. Now, it's your turn to be unbound.